we've sort of evolved a value system of our practice to give back to our communities. All of there are 5 principals, and we all sit on at least one nonprofit board. And we're partners with an organization called Tipping Point, which is a foundation that's mission is to end poverty. And so whenever Tipping Point has a grantee that needs architectural advice, we often get called and we'll give advice pro bono. So that's actually become a real foundational element of our practice. And it's in large part a reason people want to come work for us, is that they want a firm that recognizes that architecture is more about community and there are opportunities to give back.
Doug, thank you for taking the time. And if you don't mind, we'll just jump right into it. And can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Thanks, Zach. I grew up down the coast in a town called Salinas, California. Back when I was growing up, it was a town of 15,000 people. It's now 200,000 people. I guess my journey to go into architecture school was basically I had an older cousin who was an architect in the Bay Area. Kind of admired him, but I realized that I loved to draw. And my favorite pastime when I was really young, probably 8, 10 years old, was my father was a butcher, and I used to draw baseball parks on butcher paper on his table saw. And so that's the story I always give of my beginnings of wanting to be an architect. I had an older brother who went to UC Berkeley, and he used to come home and bring me the course catalog for the College of Environmental Design, and I used to really get excited about just reading about the classes. And so I went to Berkeley, and that was sort of the beginnings of getting into the profession.
Gotcha. No, that's really cool. So were you drawn any baseball parks, or were there any ones in particular that?
They were my baseball parks. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I wanted to draw, and it really was just the diamond, it was like, it was not like the outside or anything.
Yeah. No, that's cool. That's really cool. It's interesting. When I ask this question, I'm getting a wide array of answers, all the way from like, I didn't necessarily feel artistic and I didn't draw a lot. I was fascinated with buildings and looking at them, but it wasn't, I wasn't somebody to draw. And then also the other side of that, which is, I love to draw.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was one of those career days at the high school. An architect came and said that an architect knows a little bit about a lot of things, structural engineering and mechanical engineering, and that's absolutely true. And I think that was good for me because I never saw myself as an engineer who was really mathematically oriented. And then, people say, well, you don't want to be an architect. There's too much math involved. And I never really understood that. And then I also had a high school counselor who said, you don't want to be an architect. It's too much work.
I've heard that one. I've heard that.
I'd like to find him now and say, well, here we are 40 years later.
I was talking with Cecilia Quesada, and Cecilia is from South America, and her mother was an architect. Mm-hmm. And, as she was getting into architecture, kind of before women were really kind of pushing that boundary, her mom told her, don't do it. Don't do it. It's just it's not worth it. And, she's very grateful that she didn't take that advice. But I've heard that. I mean, it's an interesting profession, right? It's a calling. It's not something that you do to get rich. It's not something that you do to, it's something you do because you feel like that's what you were meant to do.
Exactly right.
Yeah. So can you tell me just a little bit about your involvement with the foundation and kind of how you got involved and what you did there?
Sure. So I was involved before the foundation. I was involved in the board of the American Institute of Architects San Francisco chapter. And I was the chapter president in 1998. And there back then there was a synchronistic tie between the AIA and the foundation, in that the foundation was the 501c3 partner of the AIA. And so by law, the foundation was required to have a ex officio member from the AIA on the board. And routinely, no one ever wanted to do that from the AIA. So I went, as the vice president, you were the ex officio member of the foundation. So I would go, unlike my predecessors, and I sort of, saw what they were doing and got involved. And then when I left the AIA position, I stepped on to the foundation board. So we're talking 97, 98 that I began being on the foundation board.
Okay.
And at the time, it was more about schmoozing, and didn't really have a mission.
Gotcha.
And we struggled for several years. I remember back then deciding really what we should be doing and what we wanted. And it took a few years, and we settled on education as supporting kids and our community. And so that felt right to me. And so I was on the foundation board from then all the way until about 3 years ago. So, and for many of those years, I was the foundation president, because there was no term limits. It was sort of a lifetime appointment. So,
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And you're still pretty involved in nonprofits to this day, right?
Yeah. So maybe if you want to just continue the conversation, sure. I go back to after I left Berkeley, after I graduated, there was a recession. And so my very first job out of Berkeley, I joined VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, which is now called AmeriCorps. So it's the Domestic Peace Corps. And I was assigned to work in a Hispanic neighborhood in central Los Angeles, doing low-income housing and community centers. And it was quite an experience for me to learn what the power of what architects could do for communities. And so I did that for a year and moved back to the Bay Area, and then started this career, working for a variety of firms in San Francisco. And kind of fast forward probably from 76, probably 20 years of working for firms. I started my own firm in 1997, and after a while realized that I could have a firm that gave back to the community in a similar fashion to the things I was experiencing as a VISTA. And so we've sort of evolved a value system of our practice to give back to our communities. There are 5 principles, and we all sit on at least one nonprofit board. And we're partners with an organization called Tipping Point, which is a foundation that's mission is to end poverty. And so whenever Tipping Point has a grantee that needs architectural advice, we often get called and we'll give advice pro bono. And only when they really need, permit drawings or actually going to do a project, do we then only charge for staff time. So that's actually become a real foundational element of our practice. And it's in large part a reason people want to come work for us, is that they want a firm that recognizes that architecture is more about community and there are opportunities to give back. So that's a big part of what the firm is, and it all kind of started back. And the foundation certainly is a piece of that, with the emphasis back when I was heavily involved in these school programs.
Right. That's really cool. That is, we were talking a little bit off camera, but I am just fascinated with the response of this industry. And, you mentioned when you came out of school, there was a recession. We might be heading for something, kind of along those lines. Who knows, right? We probably are, let's be real. And it's been really, really fun to be a part of the foundation and all of the efforts, basically helping students get hired, right? Prepping people the best you possibly can, which is not just the education portion, but it's developing the relationships, the networking, and just that mentorship, that kind of like, let me show you. You have somebody that has done this.
Yeah, we do that routinely in our office.
Yeah, it's so important. It is so important. So I got to help about 100 architects and engineers in 2018 start their own firms from an insurance standpoint, risk management standpoint, right? They went on their own, and the economy has been amazing, right? Anybody in design the last 5, 7, 8 years who wanted a job could probably find one. And I'm seeing those firms start to close up shop, as we head into uncertain times. And that's okay, because there is still a market for, I think, a really good designer, a really good architect and engineer who knows what they're doing. But, that networking, that mentorship is so important, right? Yeah. It is. And it's just fun to be a part of a place that has a mission, right? That has a really strong value system. So that's cool. Kind of leading into that, what would you say is the favorite part of your job?
Well, certainly my activity in these community organizations, I'll just explain that in a minute. So for years, I was served on the foundation board and the AIA board, and still on the San Francisco Architectural Heritage Board. But I wanted to sort of transition to giving back, this give back time, board service to more community related organizations. So in the last 2 years, I've become board members for the Boys and Girls Clubs in San Francisco, who had been a client of ours for a long time, and also for an organization called Safe and Sound, which was previously called the San Francisco Child Abuse Prevention Center. And they were a client through that tipping point connection that I explained. And so, that's a favorite part of my life, not necessarily my job. But they're all, at this point in my career, it's all tied together.
Right.
And so I do enjoy that aspect. But as far as the day-to-day job part, I still enjoy, seeing the firm grow and develop and mature. When we started 23 years ago, there were 2 of us, and now there's 45 of us.
Right.
And to nurture and develop and nurture the clients that we have, I think is wonderful to see. And I still get a charge out of, pursuing new work and capturing new work and getting new clients and new projects and stuff like that. I'm not a detail-oriented, hands-on, CAD drafter at all. But I do sort of manage the firm and focus on the marketing business development, which is what I like. So.
Right. And actually that leads into the next question, which is, can you talk a little bit about opening up your firm and then maybe what that role has looked like, from when you were a 2-person firm to 45?
Well, in the beginning, it was quite different. I was, if I knew back then what I know now, I'm not sure I would have done it. You're literally jumping in head first into it. And fortunately, along the way, well, actually not even along the way, from the very beginning, I was able to connect with a consultant who's not an architect. He's a business person, but he's had a business consulting with architects and designers and engineers and contractors for probably over 40 years, this guy named Patrick Bell. And Patrick has really been a real mentor to me and the firm for now 23 years. We see him every week now. We used to be every 2 weeks. And in the beginning, he was teaching us about basics of running a business. What's a profit and loss statement? How to set up your books, all the way to recruiting staff and recruiting financial people and marketing people, and everything about the business except for the technical and design part. And these days, now that we're sort of more mature, obviously, and have a structure of the firm, he's mostly works with us around developing new business.
Gotcha.
And you mentioned Cecilia Casada. I think she's a client of his as well.
Is she? Okay. Yeah, everybody I have talked to so far has mentioned kind of the separation of design versus the business side of architecture, right? And the design, I mean, that's what you go to school for. That's what you spend years and years and years honing your craft. And the business side,
you don't learn anything about it.
Right. It sounds like, kind of like you said, you jump in head first. And I think, in this day and age with the internet and whatnot, maybe there are more programs or gentlemen like Patrick Bell out there that might be willing to help. But
yeah,
I have to imagine, 25 years ago when you started there wasn't a whole lot of that,
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I didn't know.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing. It's kind of a tangent, which I wanted to talk to Alan about is there any way, we're obviously working with young, high school students and middle school students, but is there any education that we can provide for folks who are a little further along in their career, who are looking for that kind of business mentorship? Because there's just not a lot of that out there. And I think I've read a stat that like 4 out of 5 architects at one point in their career will be a sole proprietor, right? Wow. For whatever reason. That seems high, but I do know it's a pretty high percentage. And it means they're going to be a business person, right? It means they're going to be responsible for bringing in projects and being able to run books and things like that. So
well, there you go. There's a whole nother layer to build San Francisco. It's
right.
Mid-career or young career professional.
Right. So that's cool. What would you say has been the hardest part of your journey so far?
Well, certainly starting the business. I remember the very first day I'd been at a firm for almost 15 years, SMWM. And, I left on Friday, and the next Monday I walked into an office space, and it literally was one of those, oh my God, what did I do? Or what? And then the next question is, what do I do? And so, with Patrick's help, we started literally dialing for dollars. It was guerrilla marketing, we called it. And so I would say, the first year or two, just kind of churning through that and trying to, because, there are some firms that start where they leave big firms with a project or they have a client in place. We had none of that. Right. We literally started flat-footed. And so, how do you build on next to nothing? Right. And so I would say, that was really a stressful time. And, in the beginning, that was 1997. We had our first child in 96 and our second child in 98. And I was chapter president in 98. And we renovated a house in 98. And so it was all happening all at once. And it was crazy.
Oh man, I can relate to that right now. I have my first one on the way and have started this business and COVID and whatnot. And it just feels like you might as well just do it all at once, right?
That's right.
That's great. Are there any projects that kind of stand out in your mind as either something you're most proud of or just a really amazing experience?
Yeah. So, it's like, okay, who's your favorite child, right?
I know, right?
But I guess I would say that we did the work we did for the Boys and Girls Club. We did several projects, but we did what's called the Don Fisher Clubhouse in the Western Addition. And it sort of was a confluence of relationship with the Boys and Girls Club and this value system of giving back that the firm was creating about giving back to community. And we were able to work on this ground up, what was it, 45,000 square foot building in a urban setting, urban infill site that won an AIA award, design award, and sort of the showpiece of the Boys and Girls Club. And we're able to take other clients through the city rec and park department we've walked through, and we're now doing a rec park pool. So that's probably the one single project. But I would, if I can indulge you, I have a second project that I would speak to, and that's actually the first real project that we had back in 97 or so. This is 99, where my old boss, Kathy Simon, was on the selection committee to renovate a building at Crissy Field down in the North Waterfront. This is when Crissy Field was still an old abandoned army post with an airfield right there that would have weeds around it and cycling fences. And the vision was to create the Crissy Field we now know. And they had a little building in mind to become their environmental education center for kids to come to. And so Kathy, I remember, called me and said, you're on this list of architects to pursue this job. And she said, don't F it up. And so we pulled out everything we could imagine to get that job.
Yeah.
Deep research, understanding funding, you name it. And the two finalists were us and a very large firm, and we got the job. But I bring this up not because of that story, but because that project represented the growth of the firm. We've actually given talks about this, where if you were to say that your practice was a tree, this was all the roots and all the branches, because it taught us about getting work. It was an historic building for a public client that was all about sustainable design, that had community involvement, neighborhood involvement, as well as other organizations. And that has led to many other clients since then. It was an historic resource, so there's a preservation component to it. And now we do a fair amount of preservation work in our practice. So it really was the project that sort of enabled our whole firm to grow and develop.
It's a catalyst.
So we talk about that all the time, that was like the first project.
That's cool. Is there anybody you can think of that stands out as people who have helped you along the way in your career, either from the beginning or in the middle or now?
Yeah, I always think about who those people are. Certainly Kathy Simon was one. She was very instrumental and still very supportive of our firm. Patrick Bell, I mentioned, he's a non-architect. He, I credit him with a lot about our firm and how it's grown and developed. But then I think back to earlier days when I was a young architect. There was, a couple of architects and firms that, sort of mentored me. I remember, struggling. Back then, we're hand drawing. We're doing a lot of, smaller buildings, wood frame buildings, if you will. And I remember this older architect who used to wear a kimono so he didn't get lead on his arms, came and gave me as a gift a book about detailing wood frame buildings. And I just thought that was the most generous thing that anyone could do. And then there's a couple of examples like that along the way, where people that just take a minute to not even mentor, but just sort of interact with a younger up and coming professional that I thought was really valuable and made me feel like I was part of this profession.
Last question for you, and I'm going to kind of make it a two-part question because, as an agency principal, you can hopefully shed some light on what you're looking for when you hire a young architect, young designer. But the first part would be what's the best advice that you could give to an up-and-coming design professional?
It's a great question. Well, certainly, the resume is the first thing we look at, right? That's you send a resume if you're looking for people. But we're pretty particular about the pedigree of someone's resume, what school they went to, who they've worked for, the kinds of experiences they've had. And once the resume enables them to come for an interview, you'd be surprised how important that first handshake and look in the eye does. And I remember interviewing a young person who went to Harvard, but he showed up 10 minutes late. And I was in a bad mood and I read him the riot act. I said, "You just don't do that." And those little things that you take a resume or an interview prep class, those are all they are important. And the other thing that's important when we interview is not only the quality of the work, but their portfolio should show not just a pretty picture, but it's so important for us to understand how they got there, their design thinking and their process to get to what they're showing us. So little doodles and sketches and all that are really important to see. And also just understanding or seeing in their portfolio their other interests, if they draw or they paint or what other that might not be related to architecture particularly. It's important to see. But the other thing I think is important, especially these days when every firm has a website, that the candidate display some recognition of your firm. We have blogs on our website, and it's really impressive when someone says, "Oh, I read this blog and I understand this is what you're about, or your values or something." I think that for them to do that kind of research, and we always in an interview have a couple of standard questions. Where do you see yourself in 5 years, right, or whatever. And two, do you have any questions for us? And you'd be surprised how many interviewees have no questions. And it's just shocking to me. So I guess that would be, those would be the advice I would give to people looking for work.
Gotcha. So basically do your research and, hopefully they're showing up as well prepared with questions about you and having, done their research and read your website.
Yeah.
Are you looking for a value system? I know you're a firm that has a particular value system and kind of a particular way of thinking. Is that something you look for?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that that's high in the list of what we're looking for, but it certainly is important.
Sure.
For someone to say, "Oh, I would love." I understand that your firm has desires to give back to the community and to do nonprofit work, and that's important to me.
Right.
That would be a big plus on the ledger as we evaluate them.
Do you think that those values? Do you think that's something that's just kind of somebody can build in the culture of your firm? So if they have maybe the right skill set and they get hired, do you kind of see it as, that's something that we can maybe not train people to do, but it's just kind of something that becomes important to them?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We provide a lot of opportunities for people to participate in this community stuff. We many years ago, because it's been so hard to recruit and then retain staff, we developed what we call a culture of teaching and learning. And so it's, we have talks and classes, and we support outside professional development courses, and we have a mentor-mentee program, and all that stuff. It comes out of that, the development of our culture and building the values of a younger staff.
Gotcha. That's great. That's a pretty good place to leave it.